The teaching at SFU feels very vocational. I love the teaching and the mentoring, but like I said, I feel like students are still hungering for something more than just information and their degrees. And so the chaplaincy came out of conversations in that environmental ethics class that I was teaching, where students were pretty sardonic about their own futures, right? They were like, well, if the world's ending soon, so what does it matter? And like, well, I'm not having kids, and there's just a lot of like kind of dark humor and worry about it. And then, just a plethora of coping mechanisms related to social media. And I mean, and I don't think it's like the traditional ones, right? It's not like sex, drugs, and rock and roll anymore, right? It's like a lot of more complex video games and social media um and who knows what, right? I don't really know. But definitely people are have a craving for a more authentic way of being, a simple way of being, and then uh, modes of connecting to the natural world that could look like ritual, or they could just look like they don't look like recreation, right? It's people aren't like they're like I said, they're not in droves. They're not in droves going to the organized religions. And as far as I can tell, they're not in droves going to like traditional recreational activities like backpacking and you know, like those sorts of things. They're looking for something in between, or I don't know exactly, but that's kind of where it is. And so after I decided to drop out of the discernment to become an Anglican priest, I had, I was kind of in a dark night of the soul space of not going to any traditions, and what the mystics call the apophatic kind of phase, right? Which is the unlearning, unsaying, unpacking, you know, decreation kind of phase. Um, that word chaplain came up a couple of times. There's been a couple of people who have called themselves eco-chaplains, and some of the Buddhist seminaries have eco-chaplain programs. And I thought, well, this is maybe kind of an approach, right? A chaplaincy approach to environmental anxiety and grief. Um, Already feeling drawn to grief, right? Like I think before I did the death and dying class, I worked for a summer at a funeral home and found that experience to be completely gorgeous and strange and heartbreaking. Um, and so I'm quite drawn to spaces where grief is held. And so tending to grief is important to me, especially, I mean, so personal grief, but also the uncertainty, the anticipated grief of uncertainty around how climate will affect particular places. Wildfire, smoke, smoky skies, species, trees slowly dying out in our forest, species extinction. Um, but then definitely anxiety, I think, is across the board kind of an issue. And so, okay, well, we don't just need another coping mechanism. We need to cultivate curiosity about complex emotions and develop some tools for sitting with that. Because, as Joanna Macy talks about, right, honoring our pain for the world is what allows us to see with new eyes and to move into a space of seeing how much there really is to do out there. Even if we don't win, quote unquote, right? Like, and that would look like 1.5 degrees warming, for example, winning. We're not going to win. If that's our measure of success, then it's over. But we have lots of options still and lots of complexity and beauty, even as we kind of grapple with the hard things that are coming. And so to me, it's preparatory work, right? Anticipate, like, how do we work with grief, but how do we also cultivate curiosity about complex emotions so that we can work with them and find places that we're uniquely suited to address. My students are very talented. What, like, okay, what are you going to do with this one precious life, as Mary Oliver says? So, like, investigate, heal your stuff, like, do your work, go to therapy, but then, like, let's discern together, like, what we're going to do with some of these complex feelings. What are they going to teach us about what needs to be done and who else is out there that wants to do similar stuff, And so it's vocational work, it's contemplative practice, and it's grief work, I think, sitting in circles, talking about complicated feelings without trying to fix each other, going on forest walks, going bird watching, and then journal workshops. And then maybe a couple of those students in the class get together and decide to do something powerful or amazing, or, a blockade or a petition or a new podcast or whatever it is. So that's the project.